Good evening. Welcome to tonight's live stream. I am going to get started in a moment. I just need to let everybody on social media know that the stream is currently on the air. Okay, everybody on social media currently knows that the stream is on the air. And before I go on the air, I'm going to let everybody know that I'm going to be doing things different for the next month or two. Now, before I did live streams on StreamYard, I was just doing them on YouTube. And this time I'm deciding to broadcast them to other media platforms such as Twitch and LinkedIn. And I may possibly start streaming on Facebook as well. So that's what I want people to know, that this live stream is now currently on other platforms. And I'm hoping to see what if I can keep the viewership up as related to these lives on other platforms. But now you have options other than YouTube to check out my streams. Now, with all of that said, this whole live stream tonight is actually inspired by a viral video that was put on social media. And this viral video that was placed on social media was one of a comic shop owner who expressed his frustrations regarding the comic book industry, basically giving him product that he could not sell. Now, I just need a moment to bring up that video, and I'll share it with you in a moment. But this video basically is one that was inspired by this comic shop owner who was frustrated about how the entire industry has been treating him and his business, which he's been in business for over 30 years. And in that 30 years, he's basically been disrespected. And he's just, as I see it, just by the comic book industry, just these people have just treated him badly because he expressed his frustrations regarding regarding him making an observation about the state of the comic book industry. Okay, I'm trying to find this video. That's what I'm trying to do.
Eating 4,320 calorie box of cookie dough and running until I burn. Eating 4,003.
Well, I'm still looking for this video. I'm just trying to find it. okay, it looks like the video basically has been taken down by the whoever, but the video was done by a guy named Glenn O'Leary, and he basically said that he was frustrated about the comic books being produced by Marvel and DC. And in that video, he complained that many of the books were ones that he couldn't sell at his shop. And as he was complaining in that video, I looked at that overall video and I could agree with this shop owner. But what was really sad is as he was making his complaint in that viral video, what happened was that you had many of these comic professionals, including editors like Tom Brevoort, go out here and verbally berate and castigate this man for openly looking to criticize the comic book industry as related to the poor quality product that has been leading to stores like his being forced to go out of business. And the attacks on this man were just extremely cruel when you consider that his shop is one of the few places you can get comic books. And instead of listening to a man who has his feet on the ground and is out here actively knowing what products sell, you have professionals that are editors and artists basically going out here and verbally abusing a customer who is out here opening up his venue to sell the product. Now, this whole incident basically had me shaking my head because a lot of people on comics YouTube, they were sitting here, they came out and defended this man. And I was glad that they did that, but this did not really deal with the root of the problem, because the root of the problem of what's causing all of the bad product and all of the bad customer relations in the comic book industry has to do with workplace simps. Now, what is a workplace simp? A workplace simp is a guy who looks to go out here and submit to female authority figures and looks to give women all the power in a business. And the big problem that is making all of the issues in the comic book industry aren't what they call social justice comics. No, what's really causing a lot of the problems in the comic book industry has to do with the weak leadership that comes from workplace simps. Now, in my book, Stop Simping in the Workplace, which you can find on Amazon.com, you can learn all about the workplace simp and the damage they do in the workplace with their very dysfunctional approach to work. Now, when it comes to a workplace simp is an individual who goes to work not to go out here and master a craft or looks to go out here and work towards making money. No, a workplace simp basically comes into a job primarily for social reasons. And a workplace simp's main goals are to, one, go out here and clout chase and have a job that they can brag about to their friends. And two, they also use a job as an opportunity to make a connection with women in that workplace. Now, for most men in the workplace, a job is not a place we go to go out here and socialize and fraternize. No, a job is a place we go to, one, master a craft so that we have the skills to go out here and make money. And two, we go there to get the money in order to go out here and build our home and be able to possibly go out here and further build our business once we have mastered our craft. That is what a man goes to work to do. Unfortunately, what's happened in the comic book industry is we don't have many men actively on the job in leadership positions. No, what we have on the job are a lot of workplace simps. And what's sad about the comic book industry is that we've got a whole lot of workplace simps in positions of leadership. And these workplace simps basically are the ones who have laid the foundation for all of this dysfunction we see in the comic book industry. Because it was the workplace simps who went out here and actively hired a lot of the grossly unqualified men and women who currently are working in the comic book industry. And it's all of those workplace simp hires that are causing most of the problems that are plaguing the overall industry and preventing comic book shop owners like Glenn, who has been working in this business for over 30 years, from being able to go out here and be able to sell comics at his shop, also known as the Comic Book Palace. So he's had a shop in Massachusetts for over 30 years, and sadly, he has not been able to sell comics like he used to, and he hasn't been able to sell comics like he used to because the problem is all of the workplace simps that are in the workplace, and it's all of the workplace simps who are in all of the workplaces that are causing all of the damage to the overall comic book industry. And like Omega has stated, created the toxic work environment and the toxic culture that has really made it very hostile for new customers to come into the hobby. It is all of the workplace simps that have created all of the hostility in the business, and they've created all of the hostility in the business because these men are not leaders. No, these men are basically just a bunch of guys looking for clout and attention, and they're not really thinking about the business and the business model or ways to improve the business. Now, these workplace simps, they have been caught up in the narratives that the women have brought into the comic book industry, which are about so-called social justice. And as they've come in, they've looked to push this narrative of social justice under a false narrative of diversity and inclusion. And as they go out here talking about so-called diversity, we see that these women have never really had any perspective in life, and they don't really have much life experience because what they're proposing as related to so-called diversity really makes no logical sense, because anybody who understood the context of history would understand that this whole quest for diversity really isn't one that really works in a business model like comics. Now, these people basically are coming out of the universities and the colleges. They've never really had any real life experience. And because they haven't had any real life experience, they think that they know everything because they came out of college, but they haven't had any experience in the real world. And usually in a business, when you have rookies like this is where a boss pulls the chain and lets these people know how things are done in a business. Unfortunately, when you have a workplace simp in charge, they don't have the backbone or the stones to go out here and pull people's chains who are inexperienced and let them know who is running the company and who is establishing all of the standards for the company. I mean, in the modern comic book industry, the real problem is leadership. And instead of editorial running the business and maintaining the standards of the business, what is happening is the business is running the editors. And because the business is running the editors, what's happening is we see a decline in quality at the publications of Marvel and DC. And the main reason you see that, again, is because the editors themselves do not run their business. No, they are not the ones running the business and leading the business. No, they are out here looking to follow behind the women And as they look to follow behind the women, what they want to do is change the stories to ones that they believe will allow them to please the women that they've hired. And what they believe that this will do is make these women happy. That's what they believe that will happen if they go out here and let these women tell their kind of stories with things like the all new, all different Marvel and what's currently being published at DC Comics right now. They believe that if they give the women the opportunity to tell their stories, they hope to be able to tell a story about how they possibly got a date or how they possibly were able to get some of these women to drop the skid mark thong and allow them to get a taste of the atomic waste. And as these men are trying to mix business with pleasure as related to their quest to go out here and so-called revolutionize the business, listening to these women tell them, oh, they're going to be a new audience of readers. What they're doing actually is alienating all of the people who have been reading comic books for the last 30 to 40 years and leading to all of those people walking away from comics because these simps basically are out here looking to try to please and appease these women who are on the job, these inexperienced creators who have no real background as related to creative writing, no real background as related to history of publications, no real background as related to life experience to tell any sort of story, and no real any sort of experience at all. If anything, none of these people should be assigned to any project because they have not shown any sort of seasoning as related to their craft. And that's what a seasoned editor would have told many of these people. But sadly, there are no really seasoned editors with backbone and stones like that of Jim Shooter back in the day. No, what's happened at most of these companies is we've got a lot of really weak guys in charge. And as they have been put in charge, they believe that their all new, all different ideas are going to be the thing that appeals to audiences, but they have not really been sat down and talked to about the overall business model for comics that has changed in the last 30 years. Now, in the last 30 years, the entire business model for comics has changed, and the audience that used to read comics isn't there anymore because the distribution basically changed back in the 90s. Now, the distribution changed back in the 90s when Marvel went out here and purchased Heroes World. And when Marvel purchased Heroes World, what happened was that Marvel got in over its head as related to returnability. And as they had to deal with a deluge of returns, this basically put Marvel in bankruptcy and also made it where the entire distribution model basically imploded. And the only company left was Diamond Comics Distributors. And with Diamond being the only company in charge, what happened over in the comic book industry was we were dealing with a distribution monopoly with a direct sales model. And in that direct sales model, comics were basically sold to comic shops and they were non-returnable. And as these books became non-returnable, many of the shops they were buying the books and hoping to possibly be able to sell the books on resale for a higher price as they were unsold every month. But what happened was, as we got a deluge of bad books, first with DC with the New 52 in 2011, and then the all new, all different Marvel pushing social justice over really good stories. What happened was a lot of shops got overwhelmed with a lot of unsold copies. And as those shops got overwhelmed with unsold copies, they wound up not being able to sell those books and be able to get a profit as related to the razor thin profit margin. And they weren't able to cover their bills or their expenses. And this is what led to so many comic shops closing. And instead of looking at the overall business model, what these editorial simps did was just go out here looking to pander to women. And as they looked to pander to the women in the editor in the writing and artist departments, what they did was go out here and ignore the shop owners. And the shop owners are the ones who had to take these huge losses. And as they took these huge losses, they were going out of business left and right. Meanwhile, these guys were out here just thinking, oh, I'm going to get a date with this woman at the job, not understanding the damage they were doing to a business. And this is what workplace simps do when they're on a job. When you have a workplace simp on a job, what he does is sit here and pander to women. And as he panders to women looking to gain social currency, he doesn't focus on the profits of a business. And instead of focusing on the profits of the business, he's thinking more about getting brownie points with women in his covert contract and believing that if he gets the brownie points with women in the covert contract, eventually this may lead to him getting a phone number or getting a date. And that whole thing basically does damage to a business long term, because while he's out here looking to get his Mac on in the most awkward and clumsy fashion, the business is stumbling as related to sales. And that's how the workplace simp is doing damage to the comic book industry. And while you have a lot of people going out here complaining about the SJWs in charge, the real issue are the simps in editorial, because it is the simps that you need to get rid of. Because once you get rid of the workplace simps, you will actually cut the cancer out of the business, because the workplace simp is the foundation for all of the dysfunction, and the workplace simp is the foundation for all of the dysfunction, because this person is not about leading the business towards improving the craft or getting the sales up. No, they're only up there to go out here and look to hire women in the hopes of trying to go out here and covertly get a date. And that's the thing that damages and destroys a business's professional reputation, because what happens when you have the workplace simp in charge is he's not thinking about going out here and taking care of business. No, he's thinking about taking care of a woman on a date. And that's the main reason why the comic book industry is struggling right now, because you've got this whole group of workplace simps in editorial. And I've heard guys like Comics Matter, your boy Zach, say, oh, fire the women. No, we got to fire the simp, because once you fire the simp and you bring in a person who establishes standards, this will all start to work itself out. Because the big problem, again, with the comic book industry is the leadership. And when you don't have leadership in charge, what happens is the subordinates don't really have any sort of focus or direction. And that is shown in the products currently being produced at Marvel and DC Comics. I mean, if you go to Marvel and DC Comics, you can clearly see a complete lack of standards, because you don't see a clear house style as related to the books, art, and you don't see a complete house style as related to the story models. No, you see very inconsistent work as related to the art in several of the comics, and you see inconsistent stories as related to books, and you don't see any sort of synergy between the books. And again, that's a textbook definition of an editor who is not leading the publications and leading the brand, because a publisher who leads the brand will go out here and have books that are consistent, such as what I have here with SJS Direct. I mean, right now, here I have two books for 2023 with the John Haynes series. I have John Haynes Godbreaker and John Haynes 1987. And if you look at both of these books, The art by Mike Williams is consistent. And if you look inside of both books, the house style is consistent, where you see the same page layouts for Godbreaker that you see in 1987. So all of the books are consistent. And when I put them together with other SJS Direct Universe books, all of the books flow together into one cohesive world where you can go out here and pick up any book and be able to follow what's going on. That's what happens when you have clear leadership running a publishing house and you have somebody who's out here who gets a clear direction as related to the publications and has a clear direction for the stories. That's what happens when you have a leader in charge who knows how to establish standards. You have everything coming out consistently, and that incentivizes people to feel secure and feel confident about when they buy a book. They know that all the books at that company are going to be consistent, and they're going to come out consistently every year and every month. So they know that, okay, this book by this publisher is going to be of the same standard, and I'm going to get the same experience. That's what I offer at SJS Direct that you're not getting over at Marvel and DC, and you're not getting that over at Marvel and DC because the workplace simps basically have destroyed the structure of the business, and they've destroyed the structure of the business as they've gone out here looking to go out here and try to appeal to the women who want to push identity politics. And as those women want to push their identity politics, it has basically taken both companies completely out of whack. And it's taken both companies completely out of whack because of the just failed leadership in editorial, where many of these guys don't even have the backbone or the stones to say no to any of these women. And a textbook example of this was seen when comic writer Megan Fitzmartin decided to change the sexuality of Tim Drake, the third Robin. Now, Tim Drake, the third Robin, was a heterosexual character for all of his creation in 30 years, but Megan Fitzmartin decides that she wants to change the sexual orientation of the character unilaterally based on what she saw in fan fiction, and the editors at DC Comics didn't have the backbone or the stones to pull her chain and tell her, no, you're not doing this. And this basically made it where many fans of the character became alienated from the character and stopped wanting to buy anything with Tim Drake. And the same thing happened with Alan Scott, the Green Lantern, as well, where we had editorial not really stepping in. But when you have an editor in charge, it's their job to be the eyes and ears of the audience. But we're not seeing that happen these days because we've got a lot of workplace simps. And these workplace simps are basically looking for a work girlfriend. And as they're looking to create a covert contract to get a work girlfriend, all they're doing is screwing up the business. And eventually these guys are going to wind up screwing up their careers. Now, in my book, Stop Simping in the Workplace, I clearly detail why you always set a clear boundary for yourself on the job. And the reason why you set a boundary for yourself on the job is because you don't want to go out here and crap where you eat and make a mess of the place where you make a living. Because when you go out here and you start pandering to women in the workplace, what happens is that you go out here and make a mess that can just destroy your career. And that's what we have in comic editorial, guys who basically have made a mess of the business and possibly are on a road to, when the business starts to go into decline, are going to have to wind up dealing with allegations of sexual harassment, because what's going to happen is as the business starts to decline and these corporations can no longer subsidize these comics and just accept the losses, what they're going to do is start to think about cutting jobs. And as they cut jobs, that's when we're going to get a whole lot of Me Too style allegations bombarded at many of these guys in editorial who are out here making fun of this third comic shop owner who was in business for 30 years. Many of these guys will possibly be having to deal with allegations of harassment and having to deal with all sorts of allegations turned on them, because once these companies start having to start laying people off, what is going to happen is these women are going to start looking to try to make themselves a payday by going out here and making these allegations against these men in the hopes of getting the insurance at these businesses to pay off. Because in many cases, what these companies have are insurance policies that they use to go out here and settle many of these claims. And that's a lot better than having a severance from just being laid off. So a lot of these guys, while they're playing these games, simping on these women, don't see how they're going to be just turned into tricks, and they're going to be turned into tricks with tarnished reputations. Because what happens when you go out here and pander to women on the job is that long term, this turns into a job that screws you over. And that's what happens when you go out here pandering to women on the job. What happens is they can just turn it around on you. And that's what many of the guys in the comic book industry don't understand about their workplace simping. It can get turned around on you, and a harmless so-called flirtation, or you just trying to give somebody favor, can be revised into a story that some of these women will take to HR, or they will take and create a lawsuit around and say that you went out here and harassed someone, and that can wind up doing damage to your professional reputation, especially in this era of Me Too. Because in this era of Me Too, we are in the standard of trust and believe. And as we are under the standard of trust and believe, the woman's word is taken over the man's. And what happens is that can lead to a man winding up losing his professional reputation, winding up losing his job, and in the worst case scenario, winding up losing his freedom. So a lot of these guys at Marvel and DC in the editorial departments, they don't see the world of hurt that they're in as related to their workplace simping. But as somebody who has studied the big picture of the workplace, I see what can happen to a guy. And I not only see the damage that can be done to the comic book industry, but to the damage of a lot of personal and professional reputations. Because when you have a workplace simp in place, what happens is these guys open up a company to a lot of civil sexual harassment lawsuits, and they basically wind up jamming up a company to the point where that company basically loses its reputation and possibly loses everything as related to its whole fiscal stability. Because when these guys think with their penis, they basically, again, screw the company over by, one, making extremely poor quality product, and two, going out here and hiring a bunch of grossly unqualified people. Whenever these guys are on the job, they go out here, and the combination of their lack of standards, highly poor quality people, and creating substandard products basically put a company on a road to decline. And it takes a skilled individual to know how to vet people to avoid hiring this guy in the first place. Because the one thing you don't want to hire is a workplace simp. But what happened in the comic book industry is a lot of these simps got hired in the late 90s and early 2000s. And as these simps came into the job, they basically they were out here going out here and hiring women basically just because they liked women. And that's what basically destroyed all of these standards as related to Marvel and DC Comics. And as they destroyed the standards for Marvel and DC Comics by going into editorial, what this made it was as is that you didn't get quality books and you didn't get books that were consistent. And this is what led to the decline of everything, and also led to the whole stories that they have these days, such as the self-insert characters that the comic shop owner complained about in that viral video. Now, in that viral video, he complained that we're not getting comics that feature characters like Spider-Man, Iron Man, and Captain America. And I'd have to agree with him on that. We're not getting a lot of books that feature characters like Spider-Man, Iron Man, and Captain America. Like when I was growing up in the 70s and the 80s, because we had guys like Jim Shooter in charge who insisted that all of the books stay true to the characters and make sure that all the characters' standards remain consistent. Because there was somebody in charge to establish standards, what happened was you got books that were consistent week to week and month to month, and you also got creative teams that were able to learn how to work together and synergize with other creative teams on other books. And that is what created the harmony in Marvel Comics. But you don't have that harmony when you have a lot of people whose work life experience is they came out of college and became a so-called activist. I mean, what does an activist know about writing? That's a critical question I've got to ask guys like Tom Brevoort. The reason why I have to ask him that question is, what does an activist know about writing? Is because as a writer with 25 years experience, I look at these activists, and yes, they can talk about representation and diversity passively, but many of these people are really racist when I look at their material, because when I look at their material as related to so-called Black representation, all I see are a lot of anti-Black stereotypes. And when it comes to Black women, many of these white females go out of their way to try to make the Black women appear less attractive by changing their sexual orientation, and also going out here and making the Black women appear less attractive than the white female self-insert characters they have created. And that really shows me their, again, lack of skill, because you're creating, one, a character that is a token stereotype, and two, you're creating a character based on yourself, which is a self-insert character. And a self-insert character really shows that this writer doesn't have any sort of skill. No, a writer's job like mine is to write the character as other writers have written that character. And it's my job to make sure that my story is consistent with the work of other writers. And that's what a writer's job is to do when you're working on somebody else's character. I mean, when you're working on somebody else's character, like a Spider-Man or an Iron Man or a Captain America, your job is to make sure that Steve Rogers sounds like Steve Rogers, Tony Stark sounds like Tony Stark, Peter Parker sounds like Peter Parker, and that the story paradigm follows what came in previous stories. That is the job of a writer. Your job is to go out here and make sure that your story is consistent with the work of other writers. That is the job of a writer, to make sure that your work remains consistent with every other writer, and that the actions of your story flow organically into the stories of other writers. That is your job as a writer. Your job as a writer is to make sure that when the reader reads the story, they get the same reading experience with this character that they got when another writer was writing that story. That is the job of a writer when they're working on a comic. And when the reader gets that same experience, that is what incentivizes them to go to the comic shop and pick up comics. And that's the thing that is lost on many of today's readers, because you have workplace simps in editorial who go out here looking to give passes to many of these grossly unqualified women, and even some of these simp men. These guys don't have the backbone or the stones to go out here and tell many of these people who are inexperienced that their work is not up to standard. And that's why all of these substandard books are coming to comic shops and making it where the shop is flooded with so many poor quality books. The main reason why we have all of these poor selling books on the shelf has to do with all of these workplace simps who don't have any sort of backbone to set boundaries with the women and even some of the men in the workplace, because many of these men want to avoid conflict. And because they want to avoid conflict, they are afraid to let people know, okay, this story you have proposed is absolutely ridiculous, and I am not going to pay for it. That's the job of an editor when a story is pitched to them in an outline. If I'm hearing that the story is not consistent with the work of previous writers, my job as an editor is to come in and say, no, this is not coming to print, and go out here and say, no, it's not coming to print. And if it upsets that person, then it upsets that person. But my job is to take care of business and maintain the integrity of the characters. It's the job of the editor to make sure that the character's integrity isn't compromised and that this character is in what I call last known good condition. It is the job of the editor to make sure that once this writer is worked on this character is in good condition for the next creator to go out here and start their run on. And sadly, when you have a simp in charge, the simp is going to go out here and not have any standards. And what happens is this causes a major backlog for the next creator, because what happens with the next creator when you have a simp in charge is this person goes out here, does damage to the character and to the character's overall world. And guess what? The new writer has to come in and they have to go out here like a mechanic, stripping and replacing parts and trying to get this character back to last known good condition before they can start their run. And that really kills the momentum of the book and prevents you from being able to get sales. So that really shows you, again, the real problem at Marvel and DC are the workplace simps. And the workplace simps, they are the ones destroying the comic book industry. They are the ones who are going out here not establishing standards. They are the ones giving people passes to write and create, draw whatever they want. And they are the ones that are responsible for all of the bad product, because it is editorial's job to be the one to stop a lot of this foolishness. And they're not going out here and stopping anything. And this is why you have so many bad comics on comic shelves today at Marvel and DC, and so many books that are inconsistent and incongruent, and some runs that fall completely apart because you don't have strong editorial. Because when you're going out here producing publications, you need a strong editorial in order to maintain a high level of quality. That's what you need when you're running a publishing division, and you need to have a strong editor, because a strong editor is somebody who can say no. A strong editor is somebody who can insist that a story not go through because they know it will damage a character's brand. That is what a strong editor does, because they have to focus on the overall brand. They have to focus on what the customers want, and they also have to focus on long-term merchandising. This is what strong editors do. They will reject things like new costumes or bad story gimmicks because they understand their job is to go out here and look out for the overall brand so that they can continue selling product. That is what an editor does when they have their mind right and their head in the game. When they have their mind right and their head in the game, they understand that they have to really supervise what is being published. And they also have to go out here and not only manage the creators, they also have to manage the characters and the brand. So they have to look at the big picture as related to comics. And the big problem at Marvel and DC really is the lack of leadership. That is the main problem over at Marvel and DC. And with the big two having these incompetent people in charge, this is what's really doing the damage to the comic book industry that's leading to it being on a road to collapse. So a lot of people, they'll sit there and they'll look at the symptoms of the problem and say, oh, these grossly unqualified women are pushing what they call these SJW woke comics. But I look at the bigger picture and look at who hired these individuals. And who hired these individuals? They were a group of men, guys like Dan Didio, guys like Tom Brevoort, guys out here who were in charge like Joe Quesada and Axel Alonso. They were the ones who hired these individuals. And if you want to be able to stop the problem, you've got to cut it out at the root. And the way you cut it out at the root in a business is you've got to get rid of the simps. Once you get rid of the simp, you get rid of the problem, because what happens when you have the simps removed is that many of the females and beta males will want to leave because they will, one, not want to work under a new boss, and two, they won't want to work in a place where there are standards, and three, they won't want to work in a place where there's accountability. And with those three things, where you have a new boss, standards, and accountability, that's where you're going to go out here and have people bolting for the exit, because these people, they have no passion for comics. And because they have no passion for comics, they have no interest in learning about how to do things right. And because they don't want to learn how to do things right, these people will basically leave themselves, because they're not interested in learning about a craft, and they're not interested in building up their reputation in order to make money. So when I listened to the shop owner and he talked about how there were people who didn't have passion currently in the business, that these people are easy to get out. Once you get the simps at the top out, these people will leave at the bottom, because if you want people with passion, you've got to have people who are passionate at the top. You've got to have a people with a love of comics at the top. You've got to have people with a love of the medium of storytelling, with static pictures that are dynamic. You've got to have a group of people who love what they're doing. And the big problem with the comic book industry is that it didn't look to actively recruit those people during the 1990s. No, sadly, as we were in the extreme era of comics, what happened was the industry became insular. And as it became insular, and it stopped looking for passionate people who loved their craft. No, what they were looking for they were caught up in Hollywood and the celebrities, and caught up in trying to become a part of overall entertainment. And sadly, when they became a part of overall entertainment, we weren't focused on the medium. And I've heard people say, oh, they didn't want to hire so-called comic fans like myself. I mean, I've been reading comics since I was 4 years old. They didn't want to hire people who had a love for the craft, because they thought that they would be biased. But I'm a guy, again, I may have a love for comics, but I also have a love for the craft of writing. And I learned that craft of writing over the last 25 years on my own. I learned by going out here and reading about different styles of writing, such as the novel and the screenplay. And I took all of those techniques that I learned from the novel and the screenplay, and I also use some of that for the comic books that I write. So I have a passion for writing, and I've learned a lot of different techniques as related to storytelling. So when I go to a story, I'm looking at the story model, and I'm looking at the story paradigm. These are the things that I'm looking at, and I'm looking at how I can make that story really move. in a certain amount of pages. And I do that because I understand things like budget, because running a company like SJS Direct, I have to look at cost as related to product. So there's a lot that goes into it when you are passionate about comics and passionate about publishing. You have to understand that, yeah, you have to tell a story in a certain amount of pages. And something I learned from screenwriting is you have to learn to use the fewest amount of words to tell the most story. And with comics, I also learned you have to learn to use the fewest pages, because you in a novel, you may have 15 to 20 pages to tell a story, but in a comic, you only have 3 to 5 to get that reader interested. And these are things that people are not really learning as related to comics, because we have a lot of editors who are not teaching. And that's the real issue also I have with these simps being in charge. A lot of these simps are not interested in teaching the craft the way the late John Romita used to teach, the way the late Neil Adams used to teach, the way the late George Perez and Stan Lee used to teach. I mean, part of working in a comic book company is you're going to be doing a lot of hands-on teaching. And sadly, we're not seeing anybody doing any hands-on teaching. And that is also destroying the industry, because a lot of rookie creators are not getting that teaching and mentoring in their craft. No, they're not getting that mentoring as related to their craft, and that's preventing them from being able to hone their skills and become better creators, because creators basically learn at the hands of editorial. When you have good editorial there, what happens is that you have somebody there to teach you technique. I mean, it's very similar to what happens when you are working in a kitchen. I mean, when you're working in a kitchen, you start out as the dishwasher so you can start learning the line. And as you learn the line, you learn all of the techniques hands-on with the head chef and the other chefs. So that's that whole process of learning has been lost. And that's all been lost because, again, when you have a simp in leadership, all they're thinking about is just clout chasing and saying, "Oh, I work at Marvel. Oh, I'm a guy. I'm a big wheel at Marvel Comics. I'm out here working on with some of my favorite heroes." Instead of understanding this is a craft, and as a craft, you have to learn hands on. And the only way you learn hands on is if an editor is there in a leadership position teaching you about things like making sure your story is fitting a whole plot point within the 22 pages, going out here and making sure that the characters are well developed, making sure that the action is well paced, making sure that the panels are moving and transitioning from sequence to sequence, and making it where the person can read and understand the book very quickly. I mean, these are skills that take time for a person to learn. And sadly, nobody's teaching these skills because you've got a simp in charge. And the simp is more focused on trying to please the women by pushing their identity politics and pushing their whole idea of strong women. But the whole thing is the strength of their storytelling isn't very strong at all. And instead of giving us strong stories, what we're getting are poorly written stories with underdeveloped characters that are mostly self-inserts, and the self-inserts never have to deal with any real conflict. And as they don't learn how to deal with any real conflict, what happens is you get stories where the characters never grow or learn, and those stories basically go nowhere. Even worse, there's no editor there to ask, okay, what audience is going to buy this book? And when you ask that question, you'll have people say things about so-called representation, but none of these people who they're trying to appeal to ever represent in a store. And they never represent in a store because the editors are mostly simps, and these simps never asked any of the creators who pitched these proposals, okay, what audience are you trying to sell to with this book? What audience are you trying to target this book to? And how does this book fit into the overall model of the Marvel or the DC universe? And how is this book going to reach an audience of readers? I mean, these are critical questions an editor has to sit there and ask. And these are questions I myself ask myself sometimes before I even put fingers to the keyboard. I know when I was writing the second Spinsterella book, Spellbound, I had to ask myself, okay, what audience am I appealing to? And I said, first, I'm appealing to a goth audience. And I said, I'm also appealing to a Black female audience. And those were my two source and target audiences for that book. But I also was able to appeal to a lot of men. A lot of men picked up Spellbound as well. So when I went out here, I had core audiences that I lined up for that book. And that was before I even put fingers to the keyboard. And I also had another audience, which was young people who wanted to learn about the goth subculture. So I always had a plan for those books. It wasn't just run on feelings. Whenever I do a book and I put fingers to the keyboard for that book, I have a core audience that I want to sell to. But we don't see that kind of care for craft done at places like Marvel and DC Comics. Again, multi-billion-dollar industries, but we see that none of them have that care for the business because you've got workplace simps in charge, and the workplace simps, they will just greenlight anything that the women want based on how they feel. They feel like, oh, I want to keep making this Captain Marvel book. We've launched about, 7, 8 volumes of this character. She has not sold at all as related to sales. And the same thing with Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, where I'm just scratching my head. I mean, we've had Marvel go out here and give her at least 7 reboots. And we've also had them invest over $200 million in a TV show. And we've also had them invest over $250 million in the Marvels movie. And I look at that and it just boggles my mind because this character was creatively totaled when her first series failed. And under a good editor, they would have canceled this character at the first series, realized there was no audience, and packed it up because in the publishing world, 90% of books fail. And with 90% of books failing, you want to make sure you focus on the 10% that sell. But that doesn't matter to the workplace simp. No, the workplace simps will sit there and continue to spend money like water on failing projects and failing products, and will sit there and continue to pour money into these characters, not understanding that with each book you're going out here, you're losing money on them, and you're not only losing money, you're losing your professional reputation because anybody looks at this person and says, look, I hired a person who really doesn't know how to manage money, doesn't know how to manage a budget, and doesn't know how to manage resources. So I look at these individuals and I have to question their competence. But the whole thing is, when you have a workplace simp in charge, nobody ever questions these guys' credibility. And that's what's happening. That's destroying the comic book industry. I mean, I look at a lot of folks out here who really love comics and care about comics. And your issues aren't just these bad creators. You have to really think about the people who hired them. You have to really think about the people who hired them, because as long as these people remain in charge, you're going to get the same result. So you don't want to wind up in a vicious cycle that is the definition of insanity. No, you don't want to wind up in a vicious cycle that is insanity by going out here and thinking, oh, I'll fire the incompetent writers and artists. No, you got to get rid of the editors and get yourself some qualified, seasoned publishing professionals like myself. Because the thing is that if you want to keep your business running, you got to get rid of the simps. And when you get rid of the simps, that's when you can start focusing on establishing some level of standards, some level of accountability. That's the only way you can solve the problem. Because when I listen to this comic shop owner who's been in business for 30 years, I mean, I really felt for that guy I mean, he's out here trying to sell product that is just unsellable and stuck with these products that are non-returnable. And as he's stuck with these products that are non-returnable, these people at who are the supposed comic pros show how unprofessional they are with their set attitude of entitlement. And I say it's an attitude of entitlement because you sit there and mock the man who goes out here and is trying to sell your product. And instead of showing that man respect for the work that he does to try to sell product by going out here and listening to him, what you do is go out here and disrespect him. And that's where I got a bone to pick with people like Tom Brevoort. Again, your job is to be the eyes and ears of the public before that product gets to the shelf. I mean, it's not the job of Glenn to tell you that the product is bad. It's your job to tell the creative that the stories they're telling are terrible and, or in some cases, terminate those people. It is your job to look out for the customer, and you're not looking out for the customer. Instead, you verbally abuse this man talking about his appearance. Well, I don't care about his appearance. He's out here putting in the work and selling the product. I look at that man, and if I were running Disney or I was running Marvel, I would be sending that man an apology, and I would be sending that man an apology for the unprofessional behavior of my workers, because that is not the standard that I have here at SJS Direct. I mean, a guy who's running a publishing house out of his bedroom has higher standards than Marvel and DC, and that should be embarrassing for a billion-dollar corporation. A guy who runs things out of a bedroom treats customers better, because over the course of my 2022 Kickstarter for John Haynes at Death's Door, this comic right here, I mean, I made sure to have all of the logistics for this book ready before I even did the crowdfunding. And I made sure that everybody was able to get their books. Now, there was one person I wasn't able to get their information, but I still have their book. And if they get in touch with me, I will send it to them. And I will go out here and go to the next level for the customer, because to me, the customer is somebody who needs to be respected. And what was done to this shop owner was disrespect. And this was a person who, again, is buying your books because they cannot return them. And they are like a customer, basically stuck with this product. And they've been disrespected overall. And that, to me, just shows me, again, how the workplace Simps priority is about protecting the women in the workplace instead of going out here and looking to support the vendor who is providing you with product. I mean, it is the job of the publisher to look out for the vendor. And if the product isn't up to standard, it is the publisher's job to go out here and make things right for the vendor so that you can maintain an amicable relationship. And that's not being done because you have Simps in charge, and the Simps are not looking out for the comic shops and not really listening to the comic shop owners who keep telling you that you're making product that's substandard, you're making product that doesn't appeal to the customer. And that's another problem with the Simps in editorial. Again, these men are supposed to be the eyes and ears of the public, and your job is to listen to the shop owners. Your job is to listen to the people who are on the ground, like Glenn at the shop in Massachusetts. I mean, your job is supposed to listen to the guys at the Comic Book Palace. I mean, your job is to listen to those people. And sadly, when you have a workplace simp in place, they never listen to anyone because they're too busy chasing social currency in the group that they're in. And they don't really care about the people there. So that's the sad part about what happens when you have a workplace simp in place. And this is what I've seen with many businesses that I've done research on when I was writing my book, Stop Simping in the Workplace. When I did my book, Stop Simping in the Workplace, I know the damage that a workplace simp can do to a business. And I know that they can drive a business straight into the ground. And again, a lot of people, they'll sit there and say, oh, we've got these bad women. Well, you got the bad women because you got the simp in charge. And again, when the simp is in charge, he panders to the women, he gives passes to the women, and he's the one who brought the women there. So if you really want to get your business straight, you got to get rid of the simp, because once you get rid of the simp, you get rid of the toxic work environment. And once you get rid of the simp, the toxic environment goes away because all those people wind up quitting or they just wind up getting fired. And the only reason why that environment is like that is because the simp is afraid of conflict. And the simp is afraid of conflict because a lot of times he does things like creating covert contracts with women where he looks to go out here and make deals with those women. He looks to make a deal where he looks to get away with something and give her a pass so that she can get away with something. This is the quid pro quo that simps participate in a lot of times that winds up backfiring on them. They look to go out here and look to do dirt under the table. But what happens in most cases is that the company winds up getting jammed up. So that's why you got to go out here and get rid of your workplace simp, because your simp is the reason why your business is struggling. So when I look at the comic book industry, they are suffering right now and are on the brink of collapse. And the main reason they're on the brink of collapse is because you've got these simps in charge, and you've got to get the simps out of the business if you want your business to survive and be able to, in some ways, possibly recover. But at this point, I don't know if it can be recovered because these simps did so much damage. I mean, when you have a simp, they can just come in and take a business and make it damaged beyond repair. I mean, I've seen this happen with a lot of businesses. You bring the simp in and they just destroy the business. I mean, I even see it in politics with Bill de Blasio, who basically ran an entire city straight into the ground. I mean, if you don't get there in time, you won't be able to fix the damage. But if you want to have any sort of hope, you've got to get the simp out of your job, because if you don't deal with the root of the problem, which is this guy who is not fit for leadership, you're just going to wind up in a place where you're just going to keep replacing people with those who are just as dysfunctional. And that's what's been happening in the comic book industry. They have been they go out here and they just keep replacing one simp with another. And you need a leader in charge. You need a guy like a Jim Shooter or a woman like a Jeanette Kahn. You need somebody who can go out here and set tone and direction at the company, because in order to get what Mark Millar proposes, the 20 good comics that will keep the shops running, you need leadership in charge, and you need strong leadership in order to get to those 20 books, because to get to the 20 books, you need an editor in charge who can go out here and regulate on people and establish standards, establish accountability, look at a person's portfolio and their experience, and look at that person's whole overall background to see if they're a good fit for a character or a good fit for a story. I mean, basically commission test pictures and things like storyboards to see how this person makes a character move and flow. And when you're doing writers, get some test scripts to see if they got a good sense of the character. I mean, these are short-term things that you're going to spend money on, that are going to pay later on. And sadly, none of that care is being done right now because there are no standards. But when you get a person in editorial who, again, has publishing experience, they can have those standards set in place. And that's what the comic book industry needs right now. It needs a just overhaul of its editorial, and you have to root out the simps. Once you root out the simps, you can start establishing standards. And it's the simps that are the ones destroying the comic book industry. And you need qualified publishing professionals with the seasoning and experience to understand the business. They are the only ones who can fix many of these problems, if they could possibly can, because the damage is extensive and it's hard to foster relationships with readers of all ages these days because so much time has passed. I mean, the opportunity and the window was there with the MCU when we had the MCU going, and sadly, these simps missed out on that window because they were too busy pandering to all of these audiences that didn't exist. I mean, they didn't have the vision to understand you've got billion-dollar movies at the box office. You need to have product that goes out here and synergizes with those movies in order to make money. You needed to start talking about getting your distribution into retail at that time when the product was popular. Sadly, there was nobody in editorial with the leadership to set direction. And this is why the industry is in the dire place that it's in. And again, in that place because the simp, in many cases, has tunnel vision. And because the simp has tunnel vision, they can't see the road that they're on because they're so busy following behind women that they can't see that they're leading their entire industry straight into a ditch. Now, I'm going to get ready to wrap up tonight's stream. I'm sorry that the stream started a little late. I was looking for this video and sadly I couldn't find it regarding that comic shop owner. So I'm really sorry about that, but I'm hoping that next week I will have things a bit more coordinated. And before I go, I wanted everybody to go out here. If you want to learn how to break out of the simp paradigm that has paralyzed the comic book industry, you guys can pick up a copy of Stop Simping. On Amazon.com and learn about how to identify workplace predators on the job and learn how to set a course for your career so that you don't wind up with your career taking a big L. And before I go, I'm going to give everybody a shout out. Nightingale Wednesday Nightmare, glad to see you here. Glad to see you here, Omega. Manuel Ruffin, what's up? Computer Robots, glad to see you here. Good evening, Anna L. Ray. Rayhana, the Hana Force, glad to see you here. It's a small crowd, but I want to give everybody a shout out. And again, want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. In addition to Stop Simping in the Workplace, you guys can pick up the books of the SJS Direct 2023 catalog, John Haynes 1987, and John Haynes Godbreaker on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format right now. Both of these books make great gifts for the fantasy reader in your family. And you can pick up the 2022 Kickstarter comic, John Haynes at Death's Door. You can find this comic on Lulu.com in paperback right now, and you can get your own copy of this adaptation of the 2022 book, John Haynes at Death's Door. The full comic on Amazon.com. And if you want to also help me make my next comic, you guys can donate to the Cash App. And by clicking the link in the description box, that helps me to stay on the air. And it helps me to be able to make more comics like John Haynes at Death's Door. I want to make an ISIS comic. I have 2 scripts out here of ISIS comics. ISIS, the Beauty Myth, and ISIS, All That Glitters. I'd like to produce them soon. And before I go, I'm going to drop a bit of it. I'm going to try to see if I can drop a teaser of one of the covers that let me see if I can do this. Hold on one second. I wanted to show you guys the Amari's Revenge cover, so I guess I'll have to wait until I'll do it in the post section. I have gotten some art from Bill Walko regarding one of the SJS Direct 2024 books, and I wanted to share it with you, but I'll share it with you next week. So again, I want to thank everybody for coming out to tonight's stream, and I hope you'll be here for next week's stream. Everybody have a good evening, and everybody have a good night.